Thank you, Dr. Unasbel, for introducing to me.
Доктор баярлалаа. Намайг танилцуулсанд баярлалаа. Та бүгдээ өнөөдөр цахимаар уулзаж буйдаа маш их баяртай байна. Японы талаар өнөөдөр ярих боломж олж байгаад маш их баяртай байна. Тэгээ Японы эрүүл мэндийн тогтолцоо болон тэр дотороо эрүүл мэндийн даатгалын тогтолцооны талаар ярих боломж олж байгаад маш их баяртай байна. Орна доктор бас сайхан шинэлсэн бизээ гэж асууж байна. Тэгээд бас одоо баяр цагаан сар
in person because of this COVID-19. That's so sorry. But take the good side of this experience. Thanks to this COVID-19, we are very close using this type of the online communication anytime, anywhere. And so I think this seminar will open a very nice opportunity and a new relationship between the Mongolian country and Japan. Now, let me start with this other presentation. I hope you already have the translated version of this slide. So I try make it very simple and short. And first, I want to mention about the history of the Japanese healthcare systems, because by telling the history, I can show you that what is the basic background, the ideology that makes this introduction of the UHC in Japan possible. And then I will get into the more detail about the financing system, provision, and the price control, as well as the institutions, including the hospitals related to these systems. And then I will be open to any question. But as the Dr. Unes already said, please raise your hand anytime you have questions on the course of my presentation.
Thank you very much.
Just a moment, I try move my slide. Yes, let me start with the very short summary of the Japan's healthcare system today. It is mandated universal coverage. Every Japanese people and also their foreign the visitors who also has their the eligible visa status must join this universal health coverage of the public health insurance systems. And we largely have the two systems for this universal health coverage. One is the community-based plans, which is run by the municipality government insurers, which counts over the 1,600 over the country. And also, we have another part called occupation-based plans by NGO insurers. For example, like if you may know, we have large companies such as the Toyota or Sony. And the Toyota company runs its own health insurance systems under public scheme. And these are the larger company have this own NGO public insurers. And in total, we have more than 3,000 insurers in this country. So simply said, our system is multiple insurer systems compared to the single payer systems you observed already, like in South Korea or Taiwan or other countries. And our system is very generous, covering all the services related to the outpatient service, inpatient service, hospitalization, and the pharmaceutical services, as well as the dental services. But our system does not cover the preventive services, such as the vaccination and others, which is covered by the another public health systems. And they're very unique of this the Japanese system is we have as I said, multiple payers, but standardized benefit package. So there are more than 3,000 insurers must obey the one single standardized benefit package set by the central government. And also, their payment scheme is also very standardized across the countries. So there we have, I will touch on this later, but we have there more than 8,700 hospitals in this country and more than 3,000 insurers. But all of these payers and the providers must follow the single standardized payment scheme set by the central government very strictly, no extra charge. And finally, as I said, that we have a very large number of the providers, and the majority of them are dominantly private delivery systems. Even though these private hospitals have to follow the standardized benefit package and the standardized price scheme, and they are not allowed to conduct any fee-for-service private discretionary payment scheme. If they want to be paid by the public insurance systems, they have no choice but follow this single benefit package and a single payment scheme. And I think it sounds very odd and unique and maybe a little bit strange because the private sector should have the more wider interests and more wider and the variety of kind of the conflict of interests. The why the Japan had successfully controlled all the private sector under this standardized scheme is something historical, and which I have to tell later. For these are the history things, please refer to the already published paper in the Lancet year of the 2011, when the Lancet featured the Japan series. We have the 5 paper of that series of the papers, which touch on the whole aspect of the Japanese healthcare system, including financing, medical care systems, and the long-term care system as well. Now, this scheme shows the history of Japanese public universal health coverage things. Officially, we achieved this universal health insurance coverage at the year of 1961. So it's about just 70 years ago. Oh, no. Yeah, 60 years ago. But our endeavor to achieve this universal coverage already started at the year of the 1927, when the Japan still are under military government, emperor scheme regime. In the year of the 27, that we started, the then Japanese government started the current, the occupation-based, the company-based, the public insurance systems first, and then followed by the municipality, the systems, which was at the time voluntary. And during the wartime, all these public systems are collapsed. And after the last war, the then government has to re-establish all these public systems in the throughout the 1950s. And finally, in the 1961, we achieved this universal health coverage. The details are following. For this pre-war development, as I said, in the 1922 to 27, we first have the health insurance, first public health insurance system for formal factory the workers working in the larger companies. And this is already the mandated health coverage. And these larger corporations and the companies are mandated to establish NGO public insurance systems to pay for the whole their coverage, such as the outpatient, inpatient, and even for their workers' compensation. And for small business the then government, on behalf of these small business companies, established the larger NGO to cover them under this mandated the health coverage scheme. And this is done because then government, as I said, still under military purposes, want to make their industry stronger with very strong military purposes. And so they left behind the community workers or informal sector workers, such as the fishery and agriculture and forestry. But because of this, half of their larger, the majority of the people were left behind from this coverage and very suffered from the inaccessibility to the care available at the time. And so, and especially after the economic downturn in the late 20s and early 30s, the rural area has observed the strong diversification in their people's health status. And then the government finally started this 98, the public health insurance scheme specifically for formal sector workers in rural areas. But because of the financial the fragility, then government chose only military system, not the military systems, to the formal sector, which was the informal system was very weak and ineffective. But their additional, they left behind the sector was their urban workers in part-time. And these service workers are also covered by this voluntary system. But as I said, this is very weak. And since the 1940s, when the then government entered into the war against China, the National Health Insurance Law was amended in 1942 as mandated insurance. Again, the purpose is very strongly military purposes. Just try to cover their kind of force to cover all their people under this quote unquote public insurance systems to keep the people healthier for military purposes. But again, because of the lack of the financial scheme to support these unmandated systems, effectively, this system was not effective. And we have to wait until 1961. And the post-war, as I said, we observed the collapse of all these public insurance. And besides, the hospitals are collapsed already because of this, the war. And because of this, then from the very limited accessibility to healthcare. At the time, the available healthcare is very limited. And even under this limited the healthcare services, the accessibility was further limited to this then Japanese.
So, yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So let me back to this post-war collapse. And this really makes the social instability and the political conflict. And then government take this situation very serious to very serious because
энэ амаргүй ярихтай нөхцөл байдалд бол онцгой ач холбогдол өгөөд бас бодлого тодорхойлсон байна. Нийгмийн одоо даатгалын тогтолцоо, нийгмийн одоо халамжийн тогтолцоогоо одоо алдагдуулах юм бол улс төрийн томоохон эрсдэлд орох нэ гэдгийг бол олж харсан байна. Мөн хэрэглэгчийн эрэлт хэрэгцээ байна гэдгийг бол одоо яхаа аргагүй олж харсан байна. Мөн зөвхөн хэрэглэгч талдаа, эрэлт талдаа бус нийлүүлэл талдаа ч мөн томоохон хэрэгцээ шаардлага байна, эрэлт байна гэдгийг бол одоо үнэлж дүгнсэн хэрэг. Тэгээ маш олон эмнэлэг дампуурч нөгөө хүнгүүгээс эмчлүүлэгч одоо хүн одоо өвчтөн одоо хомсоос болоод одоо эдийн засгийн хүндрэлд орсон дампуурсан эмнэлгүүд маш их олноор бий болсон учраас даатгалын нийгмийн одоо халамжийн тогтолцоо, даатгалын тогтолцоог бол эргэж харах шаардлага байна гэж үзсэн байна. Тэгэхээр Даны дараа эдийн засгийн хүнд нөхцөлд ийм одоо шийдвэрүүд, ийм одоо үнэлгээ гараад хариу арга хэмжээдэг аваа явж исэн бол үүний араас бол эдийн засгийн одоо сэргэлтийн үеэр ирсэн байдаг. Тэгээд эдийн засаг сэргээд ирэхлээр нөгөө даатгалаас гаргах юмач нэмэх боломжтой болсон. Ялангуяа одоо үйлчлэгээ үзүүлэгчдэд төлөвлөхөө одоо үнийн одоо үн хөлсийг ч гэсэн нэмэгдүүлэх тэр одоо чадaltaй болсон гэсэн үг. Мөн хамгийн анхны Дайны дараах анхны арчилсан сонгуульч болсон одоо ясан нам сүр хүч одоо аль нь бол яг энэ асуудал дээр маш их мэтгэлцсэн байдаг. Нийгмийн одоо нийгмийн хамгааллын хөтөлбөрүүд дээр бол маш их одоо ярьсан байдаг. Тэгээд одоо яасан их баригч намын зүгээс бол нөгөө welfare одоо халамжийн гэж хэлэхүүтэй welfareism гэсэн энэ үзэл баримтлалын дор бүх нийтийн хамралтын төлөө одоо явахаас өөр аргагүй болсон байдаг. За тэгээд эрх баригч нам одоо ялаад засгийг аваад удаагүй байсны дараагаар бол 58 онд бол одоо албан журмын болгосон ийм шийдвэрүүдийг тогтоол шийдвэрүүдийг гаргасан байдаг. Тэгэхээр орнуудын засаг захиргаад ч энэ дээр яг энэ чиглэлийн үүрэг даалгаврыг авсан. Мөн одоо томоохон компани аж ахуйн нэгж байгууллагууд ч мөн яг л ийм үүрэг даалгаврыг авсан байдаг. Үүний үр дүн 61 онд бүх нийтийн хамралтай болж чадсан байдаг. Яг энэ түүхийг аваад үзэх юм бол бас хятадын их газрын хятадын түүхтэй нэлээд ижил төстэй байгаа. 2008 онд бүх нийтийн хамралтанд одоо бүх нийтээр хамруулж чаджсэн бол бас ер нь туулсан зам нь илүү ижил төстэй гэж үзэж болохоор нэлийн гетероген шинжтэй, нэлийн юм төрөлжилттэй ийм арай өөр тогтолцоо хэдий боловч харин зүгээр нэгэнт энэ одоо амжилтанд хүрсний дараагаар харин их тийм сонирн бас байдал үүдсэн байдаг. Сая дээр яриад байгаа хөтөлбөрүүд бол нийгмийн эрүүл мэндийн даатгалын тогтолцоо байгаа шүү дээ. Тэгэхээр засгийн газраас татаас өгнө гэсэн үг юм. Одоо орон нутаг суурилсан энэ даатгалын тогтолцоонууд бол яг өөрийгөө аваа явуучих чадвартай биш ийм сулавтар системүүд байсан учраас Тийм болохоор Японы хувьд бол анхны анхнаасаа л бол нөгөө татвар олгогчийн мөнгө татаас дээр тулгуурласан ийм нийгмийн даатгал болон одоо даатгалын ийм тогтолцоо. Одоо Английнхтай харьцуулах юм бол нөгөө Бисмаркийн системээс одоо хазаасан гэсэн үг. Тэгэхээр одоо Германыхтай жишээ нь хариу одоо Их Британий болон Германы системтэй харьцуулах юм бол нэлээд өөр байна гэсэн үг шүү дээ. Тэгээ бидний хувьд манай тогтолцоо ер нь харьцангуй одоо хялбар ийм тогтолцоо байхыг зорьсон юм уу да гэж хэлж болохоор одоо Япон хүн бүрийн даатгалыг бол засгийн газар нь хариуцсан шаардлагатай бүх дэмжлэгийг үзүүлнэ гэсэн ийм үзэл баримтлалаар явсан. 2000
relatively success covering everything. But for the community-based one, as I said repeatedly, it was very weak and voluntary for the first time. And after this amendment of national health insurance systems, they are mandated. That's good news, but without a strong financial backup. To support these community-based systems, then government has to raise the fund to support these local systems. Because local systems by themselves has no strong complete the insurance scheme. Because they have the likely to have the lower income and the revenue, while they have the higher chance of the risk of the health care utilization. To compensate this, then government decide to use the general tax to be used for the compensation for this weak part. So, in a sense, this use of tax is very unequal from the point of view of this larger company side, because they pay tax, but they have no benefit from this. So it's a huge redistribution system. Yes, actually, the Japanese system and the healthcare insurance system is because of this chimera things. The behind the scene was that the insurance system is not the insurance system per se, but it is the huge redistribution system between the formal sector and the informal sector. So that was the true story behind when the Japanese universal health coverage was established. And after this, in the 61, we still have the huge inequality between this the company-based scheme versus the local municipality community-based scheme. For example, like then the occupation-based the system covers everything without copayment, while the community-based one asks the 50% copayment. Huge inequality between the scheme and the benefit. And after this 1961 to 1973 was the political process to close this gap between the two schemes. In the year of their 1973, then government amended again this national health insurance systems and reduced the co-payment rate from 50% to 30%, or benefit rate from increase the benefit the rate from 50% to 70%. In addition, the 1973 was remembered as the year of the welfareism. The start of the welfareism in the Japanese social welfare the policy discussion. In the 1973, in addition to this, the reduced co-payment amendment, the government introduced the new subsidy to compensate the catastrophic co-payment. So if you have the larger co-payment monthly, exceeding the upper threshold set by the income level, according to income levels, this exceeding part was covered by public insurance systems and compensated back to the beneficiaries. And thanks to this, the Japanese the healthcare system exercised since then the very strong the preventive function against the catastrophic co-payment. So there was the very happy days, but only for limited times, because of after the 1979, the Japanese economy as well as the global economy had to face their economic downturn again because of so-called oil shock and the related global economy downturn. So until this is the short history of the Japanese universal, the beginning of the universal health coverage. And if I put this the story onto this the famous the WHO's 3D box model, which as you may know already, tell their population coverage, benefit coverage, and the cost coverage in the three-dimensional scheme. The Japanese system first start their population coverage first, and then benefit coverage second. And finally, the cost coverage when the economy allowed and affordable to do so. So taking all these other 3D dimensions, as I said, we started in the year of the 1927, and finally 73, we achieved a certain level of the universal health coverage with a strong protection against the catastrophic co-payment. So it simply takes 40 years from the beginning to reach this welfareism-based scheme. Long time. And thanks to their then economic boom. But after that, Japan has to face two challenges mainly. One is economic stagnation since 1980s, and especially very strong after the 2000. And the other and the more serious is the population aging, which was accelerated since the late 1980s. Before we kind of get into this the challenge part, let me again make the very simple scheme to show how the Japanese systems exercise their redistributional system rather than the simple healthcare insurance coverage. This figure is cited from the as I mentioned, the Lancet the paper in the year of the 2011. And so the for details, please refer to this paper. But to briefly mention, this blue part is their employee year. And this next one is employee, the people. And
excuse me, Professor Hashimoto.
Yes.
Could you please full screen? Full screen,
sure.
Because yes,
it's too small.
Yes, it's a little bit small. We cannot see.
Okay, can you see
Full
this?
screen.
Full screen? Okay, just a moment.
Yes. Yes, please. See, we want to see the.
Still, it's a little bit small. So maybe
yes.
yeah. So maybe you can see their handouts at hand, please. This simply tell that we have the 4 larger schemes. From the left hand, this is the larger companies systems and the small business systems, and community-based system on the third, and finally the rightest and on the rightest the side is the special public insurance scheme for older people aged over 75. And the blue part is there are the contribution from the employer or business side. So the larger company has to pay for the half of this the contribution. And the rest of their the premium contribution is come from the employees, their salary. But for the smaller company, the only employer and the employees' contributions are not enough to cover whole the utilization. Then comes this orange part, which is the tax transfer from the government. And for the self-employed, the community-based one, since they have no employer, all their the contributions come from the beneficiary himself or herself, which covers only half. So the rest of the half contribution is covered by the tax subsidy. And finally, for the older people, again, the older people has paid the premium, but only it covers the 10% of the whole the utilization. And the rest of the 40% is come from the transfer from existing the insurance system, from the larger company system, small business system, and community-based systems. But still, it only covers the 50%. Again, the final rest of the 50% is covered by a general tax transfer from the government. And the Japanese system is very the systems to cover their those who has the financial or the weakness, fragility. So in a sense, this is very unequal. But in a sense, this is very, very welfareism-based thing to cover, to make the money transfer from those who are rich to those who are poor and unaffordable for the care. And with this, that we have the, excuse me, just a moment. Yeah, and this the graph shows how this the redistribution systems works very well. We calculated the financial contribution equity across the income levels of the household. And this shows in the horizontal, the axis shows the so-called Kakuwani index, or the index indicating the level of the inequality in the contribution. The upper side shows the richer pay more, and the lower side, or the minus, or the indicator shows the poorer pay more. And because of this, the heterogeneous systems, the money sources for covering the medical care in Japan comes from the direct tax, indirect tax, premium contribution, and out-of-pocket. And of course, the direct tax is the progressive, showing the high level of the Kakuwani positive index. And the indirect tax and the premium contributions, and these are relatively the regressive, or the poorer have to pay more. And the out-of-pocket payment is also regressive. But thanks to this direct tax transfer systems, all these their negative side was compensated and balanced by this the larger plus part of due to the direct tax and making all things balanced and null. So the final weighted total shows almost zero, suggesting in the Japanese current systems, richer pay as they can pay, and the poor pay as they can pay. And the contribution degree is quite equal across their income levels. And this was achieved thanks to this, the mixture of social insurance systems and the tax transfer system in Japan. And under this, the next thing we have to think about is whether, yes, contributions are equal, but whether the access to care is equal, so-called horizontal equity in access to care. Again, we calculated this horizontal index things using this concentration index systems. And 0 means they're very equal across the income levels. And minus means that is the poor have the better access, and the plus means the richer has the better access. And as you can see, all of the countries who introduced this social insurance, mandated social insurance systems shows the quite nearly 0 horizontal index, suggesting the horizontal equity in access was held across these countries. And Japan is same, and very nicely. Now, as I shortly mentioned before, until 1973 was the happy days. But after that, we have to face the difficulties because of the economic challenge and demographic challenge. And both relate to the financial sustainability threat to the existing systems. And then the government changed the policy into the more cost containment, and how to keep the financial sustainability has been the main target of the policy discussion since then. The first thing that Japanese government took was the strong price control, which may not be applicable to other countries. But let me tell you what happened. This graph shows over the time since the year of the 1970s to the 2006. The red bar shows the health expense growth rate compared to the expense in the previous year. And the blue dot line shows the GDP growth rate compared to the previous line. And what you see here is that the trend of GDP growth change and the health expense growth rate change was so parallel. There is, the Japanese system until today use their strong price control systems to withhold the health expense within what the economy can pay. And this price control has been done through the very unique fee-for-service list-by-list standardized payment scheme. And this is very kind of complicated, and maybe it's kind of a little bit hard to imagine from your side. So let me tell you some example. In the Japanese systems, every item by item are listed and priced by the central government. For example, like if you have the 1 vial of antibiotics, the price is set for this specific antibiotics. If you run the CT examinations or the ultrasound the examination, for example, for like the brain CT or chest CT or abdominal CT with without contrast, everything is set. They are standardized for the standardized price by the central government. And every insurer and every providers, clinicians or hospitals has to follow this price list set by the government. No extra charge or no discount are allowed in the Japanese system. Very strong and coercive the policy for this payment scheme. And maybe this is too strict and regulated to apply to other countries, even in the United States, United Kingdom, or the other European countries who adopted this type of the social insurance systems. They do have some price control system, but this item by item without any extra charge or discount, such a very regulated the price payment system is only observed available in Japan. And I often asked from the other countries' officers or their scholars, why the Japanese Medical Association does not refuse this item list, and instead asks the more FIFO-based service, FIFO service-based payment instead, or to charge as they want. Well, theoretically, they can do that. They can do that. The ones they decided to go outside of this public insurance payment scheme. And indeed, several clinicians chose to do so for their specific the services such as the plastic surgery and the other type of the anti-aging prescription or something like that. But the market size is so small because the established market for the all available standardized medical care is under this public insurance systems. And as long as you want to join this public insurance scheme, they have to obey this regulation. That's the Japanese rule. And even the Japanese Medical Association, they have the very strong financial incentives against this the tight price regulation. They negotiate on this price setting discussion, but not they do not demand to refuse this price list per se, because they already take this as a standard. And also they already relying on this the price list as a stable the revenue resource in their strategic hospital management. So I do not believe that the inclusion of this the Japanese style of strong price regulation is not applicable to other countries with different history and the political relationship between the payers and providers. So I mentioned this already. And another thing that the next thing that the government started was the more direct control on the supply and the demand sides, because the price control was so rigid and there is no room for further control. But still, we have to observe the increasing utilization and the medical care cost over the time because of the increasing consumer price and increasing population demand due to the population aging. So price control is not enough anymore. And so the government decide to include higher, stronger inclusions. The first thing is in the year of 1985, the ministry first introduced the First Amendment to Health Service Law. Under this, they first tried to introduce the bed control directory, but only in failure. And also, for the demand side, the government introduced the raised co-payment to counter against the so-called moral hazard overutilization. Again, this co-payment, the control was not successful to suppress the utilization, and simply because the impact of the moral hazard is very limited in the medical care in the Japanese case, or in a different way of thinking, or those saying the price elasticity of the medical care was so low. And finally, the government started to kind of the control the providers per se. As I said, the Japanese open access policy, no strong gate and gatekeeping systems, because the larger majority of the providers are in the private sectors who run business. And about 8,700 hospitals now in Japan, and they are largely their private hospitals, but non-profit one. We do not have the for-profit the hospitals and the clinics, thanks to their the legal regulation. The Japanese system does not allow for-profit providers under this public health insurance systems. So the private hospitals are still the non-profit, but still they do have the interests. And the larger and the majority of these non-profit private hospitals are very small and limited in the functions, such as for the chronic care or subacute care. And the larger public hospitals are mainly for the acute care with high-tech equipment. And the problem is that the larger public hospitals are relatively shortage in the manpower. But for this small private hospitals, they have the abundant the source of beds, and which leads to the overutilization sometimes, because bed built was bed to be filled according to the business incentives, and which leads to the unusually longer lengths of stay in the Japanese hospitals compared to European countries or US, or maybe even with your country. And because this the tendency of the overutilization and the private sector dominant systems, the government decide to introduce their bed control that failed. And then they used instead the differentiation of the systems by the hospital performance to change the payment scheme for acute care dominant hospital function versus chronic care functions. Or let me just skip this slide. But their introduction of this does not successfully control the ever-increasing utilization, and mainly because of this increasing population of older people who have the larger demand for care. So let me just skip this. And the fee-for-service thing is, again, I already talked about this. And I already talked about this already. So there the current major challenge that the Japanese, the healthcare policy has to face is how to meet this challenge of population aging. And under their limited resources, as you may know already, the Japan is not such rich already because of increasing debt per GDP. Among the OECD countries, the Japan has to face the ever increasing debt percent of GDP among the OECD countries. So limited economic resource and increasing demand by the population aging. So sounds very pessimistic. Or, as I said, the increasing demand by population aging is serious, but if we have the closer look at it, it's not the overall overutilization. Actually, if we decompose the utilization of medical utilization into the hospitalization rate, length of stay per case, and unit expenditure, we can observe that the population aging is lead to the increasing utilization simply because older people use healthcare more frequently. Not such intensively, but more frequently. Simply, they have the larger chance to have the medical care service attention. And among them, the larger part is the cardiovascular disease or neoplasm or respiratory disease, which are all related, so-called lifestyle-related disease, or maybe the preventable. And so the government decide to change their policy for strengthening the preventive medicine rather than the treatment medicine. And since the 2008, we introduced, the Japanese government introduced the all health checkup systems to find the early detection of this cardiovascular or diabetes and other life-related disease in expectation for the early detection leads to the lower utilization. After the 12 years since the 2008, most recent the health policy research shows that this all health policy, all health checkup policy failed to achieve the cost containment of the utilization unexpectedly, or maybe expectedly. Preventive service does not necessarily lead to a lower utilization under this population aging. Finally, the government decide that they have to pay for acute care appropriately and chronic care appropriately according to the level of the demand. In the current fee-for-service price list schedule systems under this private sector dominant, the provision systems, larger hospitals or even for the medium-sized hospitals want to take the acute care functional performance because it is paid better. And because of this, the larger hospitals or small hospital has to rely on this acute care, high-tech, expensive service provisions, leaving behind the increasing demand of chronic and more resource unintensive care for the older people. So in a sense, we have the very strong or the large kind of mismatch between the demand under the population aging and the supply under the business interests. to solve this mismatch, the government decided to introduce their nomination system for the hospitals. So you should be here for acute care. Depending on the hospital's functions, the government decided to divide the hospitals into the different functional schemes. And for this purpose, the government introduced, if you may know already, Japanese diagnosis-rated system called diagnosis procedure combination, or the DPC. DPC system was introduced since the year of 2003 for the acute high-tech university-based the tertiary hospitals first, and then extended for today like the 16 hospitals with acute care performance. And this DPC system is a very unique combination of a fee-for-service system and the case mix per diem the payment. And often it is confused that the Japan introduced the DPC for cost containment. Well, actually, it was not, because we already knew when we introduced the DPC that introduction of this type of their diagnosis-related group-based payment does not lead to the cost containment. But instead, we did know already following the US case that by introducing this the standardized information system like the diagnosis-related group scheme, we can manage better the hospitals. Actually, we introduced this DPC and asked the hospitals if they want to be join this DPC payment scheme. They have to provide DPC-based detailed clinical information to the ministry so that they can use that data for comparative purposes. Actually, all their the participating hospitals under this DPC systems have to provide very detailed their patient-by-patient data related to their clinical status as well as their resource utilization informations. And by this scheme, under this standardized classification systems, the government, Ministry of Health and Welfare, provide the comparative data across the hospitals with their name. Currently, every Japanese citizens can access to that data, which hospital has their how long length of stay, under their how many patients for example, like a liver resection or heart transplantation or any other type of the procedure, and how many or how much they have to pay. And by this, the hospital has to face the so-called accountability of their performance. They have to explain why they charge more compared to other hospitals in the same DPC systems. And if they can explain why, they can get it. But if they can't, they have to change their practice style. And indeed, after this introduction of the DPC system since the 2003, before that, we have the larger variety and the variance in the length of stay across the hospitals. But today, this the variety, the variance is kind of reduced dramatically. That is suggesting the standardization of care process was achieved and improved since this DPC introduction. And that is very important because the accountability and the standardization of care allows us to better manage the acute care. And the government already took this DPC system with success to control the acute care processes. Still, we have the long way to go for chronic care management, which do not have this kind of standardized measurement. But since the 2010 again, for chronic care, we do have the more simplified, the standardized information system for the chronic care beds based on the ADL and the medical needs classification and so on. Oops. Finally, the medical their care plans. This is already I mentioned already. Yes. And the health checkup system is also I mentioned already. So still we have this challenge by the aging. And actually for today, we have no good answer to better handle this challenge. Currently, the Japanese population, about 29% of the whole total population are already aged over 65. They are one of the highest population aging rate across the globe. And because of this front line of population aging, Japan is a kind of the guinea pig or test case of how to handle this population aging and keep the universal health coverage scheme for health equity. Currently, financially, it is conflicting. And we try find how to compensate and take the balance. So let me just stop here because I already talked an hour already. So tentatively, the conclusion of the Japanese case study is that we achieved universal coverage thanks to the strong demand and the political background for the welfareism demand and the barriers to human rights and health equity, and supported by the then economic growth, and a very strong commitment from the central government to decide to introduce universal health coverage system as redistributional system. And this structural legacy has a strong inertia until today. And this is good part, since the Japanese people enjoy until today their very nice free access to care. I mean their open access to care without any waiting line and with affordable cost. But flip side of the coin is that because of this, the once achieved equity in the contribution and access, we have to face their challenge by population aging and limited economic resource. So we have to compensate and give up this achieved equity, or find any better manage to keep this welfareism ideology, but better efficient management. That's a still ongoing challenge that Japan has to face. And I can't tell whether we can do that. Now, let me stop here and invite their questions from the floor audience.